Welcome to another episode of Crescendo, where the journey of self-discovery meets the adventure of entrepreneurship for female founders, entrepreneurs, and small business owners. I'm your host, Rachel Lubchansky, an entrepreneur turned business mentor and strategist, guiding women to build businesses that align with who they are at their core, the positive change they want to see in the world, and the financial security they desire. Each week, we connect to unravel the complexities and joys of building a business that ignites a life you love. I hope that through this show, you feel supported as you step into the most authentic, full, and beautiful expression of your own voice as a business owner. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Gila Tolub, a French-Israeli growth advisor, consultant, and speaker specializing in healthcare innovation. With over 20 years of experience, including a significant tenure at McKinsey and Company, Gila has now embarked on her own entrepreneurial journey. In this episode, we'll delve into Gila's inspiring journey from being a partner at the #1 consulting firm in the world to becoming a growth advisor, forging her own path. We'll explore how she navigates new possibilities, aligns passion with potential, and continues to make a meaningful impact in the world of healthcare and beyond. Hi, Gila. Good morning and welcome to Crescendo. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hi, Rachel. I'm very happy to be here too.
Thanks. Before we get deep in our conversation, I'd love for you just to share a little bit more about who you are and your background.
Sure, with pleasure. So there's so many ways to take this, but I always say that I've been a consultant for 20 years. So mainly strategy, and the last 12 years with McKinsey and Company in healthcare. Although I left McKinsey in July, right before the summer here. I have spent 12 years in healthcare working with hospitals, but also pharma company, med device companies. And I've spent my life in mostly three different countries. France originally, where I grew up, then in the US, New York and Chicago for 12 years. And now I live in Israel for the last 8 years. And then there are a lot of other things I could say, but just tell me what's most interesting.
Yeah, of course. When I ask that question, of course, it's a loaded question because we are so much more than, the 30-second intro that we can give somebody. I know, for instance, you're a mom to 4 children and you have a very busy life, doing all sorts of work, not just professionally, but also as a volunteer. So I want to go back to your roots as a consultant. You spent about 20 years in that space, and you said that you left your job in July. What was the impetus for leaving your job as a consultant, specifically at McKinsey at that time?
Yeah, very good question. So I've been there for 12 years. So, some people would say, oh, it's been a long time and it's okay. You want to do something else. But of course, there's always more to this. So first of all, I would say things changed a lot at the beginning of COVID. So I came back with my 4th maternity leave. You mentioned my 4 children. So I came back from my 4th maternity leave on March 1st, 2020. So my first decision was to cancel my trips. I was not going to go see my clients. I actually had been co-leading our vaccines practice since 2015. When I created our vaccines practice, people told me I was crazy. Some people even said I would probably not become a partner if I followed my heart and not, my brain. But in 2019, 2020, so we have this practice and we're all wondering, how we're going to help. And at that point, I decided to follow the path of global public health, which also led me towards the path of health equity. So I supported all of the efforts globally on how do we bring vaccines to the world and how do we ensure people have access to the care that they need. And health equity is not only about the South Hemisphere versus the North Hemisphere, it's also about every country, really. Even countries that have universal healthcare, there are a lot of areas where people just don't have the access that they need. Women, for example, just because of the knowledge gap and the data gap, we just don't get the care we need. So I'm starting to work on this between 2020 and 2023. It's super interesting, very relevant. And I also stop traveling so much. I used to be on 3 planes per week. But COVID makes me stay here in Israel much more. And because I'm in Israel, I'm also hanging out with a lot of super cool startups that are bringing new technologies to market. And that opens up a new horizon. And, I want to do innovation. I want to do new things. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go do innovation, mostly on health equity, mostly women's health and mental health, which also suffers from a lot of disparities because of the knowledge gap. And that was really the decision to leave. And I said the famous last words that I'll know what I'll do, after the holidays. I'm going to take the summer off. And it was a scary time to make a big decision, but I really felt like it was time to do something new.
Yeah, I want to actually ask you a little bit more about that being a scary decision. Was this idea of following your heart part of the equation, and how did you get to that specific moment and decision?
Yeah. So look, McKinsey is a place where you are really encouraged to follow your own path. There's a saying called "Make Your Own McKinsey." It's a very entrepreneurial place. So it's not frowned upon, but you need to still make your numbers and you still have to have clients. And so, when it turns out that it works, it's great. When it doesn't, then, you tried something and maybe you have time to try something else, but there's an expectation that, you're bringing client and you're having impact on the work, in the work that you do. For me, there were a few things. There was this whole piece that I mentioned around traveling, finding my balance. There was also this piece around doing more work on innovation. And so I really thought, is there a way to do it internally? And I tried. I was leading our health tech practice here in Israel, and for a while it was a lot of fun. I served 15 startups while still at McKinsey. But I realized that if I wanted to do things a different way, I had to take a different path. And it was a very hard decision because I am the sole breadwinner in my family, and there is comfort in being part of a very large company with lower risk in terms of, getting a paycheck every month. But at some point I felt like it became unfair to me. Like I wasn't being fair to my own values and to what I wanted to do. And as soon as there was this values question of, are my values still aligned with the work that I'm doing? Suddenly there was like this mindset shift in my head. It was like, no, it's no longer aligned to who I want to be and what I want to be. And then it became almost black and white in my head. Oh, then if it's not, then how could you be an authentic leader and stay in this position? You can't. And authenticity is super important for me. And so as soon as it became a question of like, if I'm no longer aligned and I can no longer be authentic, then I had to go. And so this whole back and forth in my head, or should I not, suddenly crystallized into, well, this is no longer who you are. You can no longer be authentic. Then you have to go.
Okay, so the values were misaligned. Was there also still significant amount of fear, and how did you move past that?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear, obviously. So I'll tell you, originally, I did find I had a nice job offer. Someone offered me to join as a consultant for half of my time and half of my nice McKinsey salary. And so it really helped with the fear. I was like, okay, so now I'm going to look for either an offer that's better than this, better than half with them and half with my own clients. I really wanted to have my own clients. There was also some part of me that was like, well, maybe I could do this entrepreneurship journey, have my own clients, but 50% of the time I'm with these people, so it removes the risk, And so, I tried to go at it that way, and I felt very secure about this job offer. And actually, every time I met another person, I spoke with at least 150 people, right? That's also how I get over my fear. I actually just create a work plan and talk to a lot of people and see what's realistic, what's not. And there was nothing that sounded better than half my time with a consulting firm and half my time, with my own clients. Now, the funny part, not funny, haha, is that 2 days before my last day, they rescinded their offer. Back in the summer, the worst thing that we thought could happen was a downturn, economic downturn. And they started to see their clients, cutting costs, especially as consulting, leadership development, all these areas are the first ones to get cut. And so they told me, we're sorry, but we can no longer, have you. I have to tell you, for 2 days, I had this major panic. And I used to laugh with my husband that I couldn't find the words for anything. So I said, either this is early onset Alzheimer or this is stress. Pretty sure this is stress, but early onset Alzheimer really sucks. And I couldn't find any words. And and then after 2 days of, big stress, I was like, okay, would I have made a different decision had I not had, that offer? Maybe. Did that offer help me make a difficult decision that I think is still the right one? Yes. Therefore, let's think that this is also for the best. And I was lucky that, of course, I had some money aside, and I knew that it's okay if it takes another 6 months until I find, what I want to do next. And so I said, maybe it's a gift in disguise. I'm going to spend the summer thinking about what I want to do next. And that's what I did. Now, after the summer, the war started, and obviously a whole new chapter of my life started.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about that because you've done some really impressive work since the war began and important work. But before we do, I think this idea that your values really drove that final decision is so important for people to hear. I think, one, it's important that we know what our values are, and right, so that we can align our lifestyle and our work style with our values. But also for people to hear that we really can make values driven decisions that make our whole life better, right? And
Yeah.
I think, like, in that moment of fear, you move through the fear because there was, what I'm hearing you say is like almost like a visceral yes or no, right? It became like this very black and white. It was a yes, it's time to leave, despite everything else feeling like it's unraveling around you and not necessarily looking as you had initially imagined.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really hard for us. And I love also that you talked about having 2 days, right? Because I do that too. I'm like, okay, I'm going to give this space, whether it's grieving space or whatever the emotion is that I need to work through, like giving it some amount of space and then moving on, right? Okay, then what are we going to do with this? And I think that really helps us not to get stuck in this state of wallowing in
Yeah.
our sorrows and in what could have been and should have been and so forth. Okay.
There's
All
also
of
some
that
practical element to this, by the way. I learned not long ago, but now, it's part of my work. But when you have something that shocking that happens to you, there's naturally those 2, 3 days, 72 hours of acute stress response, right? And I really think that I was in this acute stress response of, oh my God, what have I done? I'm the sole breadwinner. I have 4 kids. I had this job that I could have rode along. Really, there was nothing pushing me out, right? A lot of people tell me, oh, but baby, you had to. There was nothing pushing me out. I had at least 2 years where I could have, continued down that path. After that, maybe, it would have depended on my numbers and a lot of things. But, for those 2 days, it was really this acute stress response of, I can't even think properly. And then, your system comes back down and you are ready to process. So you have to let yourself, feel those things and realize that, you know, there was probably no good decision I would have made in those 2 days anyways, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, you learned a lot about this acute stress response. in the ensuing months. There's a saying in Israel that we say "Acharei Chagim," which means after the holidays. Everything starts after the holidays. School for the kids gets more serious after the holidays. Any goals that you set, you'll start working on them after the holidays, right? So Acharei Chagim for all of us here in Israel meant that we had come into a full-fledged war after a horrific attack on our nation and our people. Tell us about those early days with your expertise in the area of health equity and supporting growth of not just businesses, but humans as individuals. Tell us what you did in those first few days and weeks.
Sure. Look, so again, acute stress. I would say a lot of people give me too much credit. I was in my pajamas for 2 days, not really knowing where to start. And as often in our life, it's our kids who force us to move forward, move forward. And in my case, the first 2 days, all I could do was send some messages on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I'm a great warrior behind my keyboard, and I'm doing all those, raising awareness. And I'll tell you an anecdote, because it's just really like it was my wake up call. So my 15-year-old, I'm in freeze mode. I think he's in fight flight mode, right? And he needs to go to the gym and needs to run, and he's doing a lot. And at some point he says, I'm going to bake challah bread for the soldiers. And it's on the Wednesday. And I said to him, it's awesome, great, and he did it with the little ones. So it was super cute. I even, in my pajamas, went downstairs to take a picture. And I explained, he's very good looking at the recipe on his phone, but then he reads that he has to wait. I was like, what does that mean? I have to wait. I'm like, yeah, the dough needs to rise. There is no way in hell I'm going to wait 45 minutes. I have to go to the gym. I have to go run. I can't just wait and do nothing. And he's getting so agitated that I said, okay, you know what? I'll bread it. You go and do whatever you have to do. Already making the dough was great. And as I'm breading the challah, I told my husband, I'm like, we're going to lose the war. And he looks at me and he says, what is wrong with you? I never knew you to be so negative. And I'm thinking like a consultant in my head. And I'm like, I'm just working on the wrong project. Like, everybody needs to go back to what they know how to do. And right now we're all just doing what's right in front of us. And I ended up saying a few times, like, we're letting trauma manage us instead of us managing the trauma. So I was making bread, which, nothing against making bread. It's great. It smells great in the house. I'm terrible at baking, and I don't like baking. And I should be doing what I'm good at and what I know how to do. And it was such a big wake-up call that as soon as the bread is in the oven, I told my husband, if you need me, I'll be outside on my computer. I'm going to start a work on a document that says, what should we do to accelerate trauma healing in the country? It wasn't just popping up in my head. I also had a few friends from outside of Israel that were asking, how can we help? Where can we send money to? And given I work a lot in mental health, a lot of their question was about mental health. That's the only thing I could think about. And that paper became the beginning of my new chapter in life, because, I put it aside. I have to tell you that on Friday, I got another call with a friend asking if I could donate money for Nova survivors who needed a lot of help. And I said, I don't have the money, but I can help with the organization. And I know a lot of people that do work in trauma. I can bring them along. And I ended up putting aside my paper to go help them for the first 3 months of the war. I became interim executive director of a place called the Healing Space, where we took care of the Nova survivors. And then I went back to that original paper to think about, how do we accelerate trauma healing beyond the Nova survivor, at the population health level, beyond the early intervention, all across the pathway. And so, I think, it's this anecdote about, making bread, but it was actually really a great wake-up call for me, to get back to the things that I know how to do.
Yeah, I love that you shared that anecdote. It's a great one. We talk a lot on this show about listening to your inner voice and also really connecting with your own inner gifts. And I think each of us has a role and each of us has talents and skills that we can offer in this world. And I think so often we try to, become the baker when we're just not innately a great challah baker. My husband and I actually have a thing where our challah tastes best and looks best when each of us has our hand in the same dough. I make the dough, he braids it. It's like, it's fine, it's good when I do it, but it's best when he takes over after. So, and I think that that's for all of us, right? For our world, is that if we can find those places where we really excel and shine and can offer the kind of support that we intuitively have and have cultivated within ourselves, then that's how the world like keeps churning, right? Our organizations can keep churning, and we can ignite that ripple effect of good. I also think that as you were talking and you talk about putting aside the paper, it's this idea of like listening to the whispers, and you could have like ignored that call and been like, I'm focused now on developing this thing, right? But it sounds like too that those 3 months that you spent in that interim space probably really lent itself to developing the next organization on a much deeper level, because the amount of in-depth, hands-on, I don't even know, real world experience that you had through that took everything that you'll do next to a whole new level. True or
No,
false?
it, I mean, there's a lot about, listening to your inner voice. And one thing that I learned though is about listening to the messages from the universe, and that took me a while, I have to say, because I'm very type A personality and I like to make a plan and this is how I'm going to get there, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm always like, oh, I still don't know the answer to that question. And then someone told me 2 years ago, Gila, why do you need the answer by the end of the week? Like, why don't you wait for the universe to send you the answer? And I was like, what is that person saying? Like insanity. But now I I understand this. It's like, this came. So I'll tell you the other reason why it makes so much sense for me to put the paper aside is that if there's one thing we know about trauma, we don't know a lot. A lot of people think we know much more than we know. But the brain in general, the more you know about the brain, the more you know we don't know anything about the brain. The one thing we know is that the earlier you intervene, the earlier you create that safe space for people to be able to process what's happening to them, then the higher likelihood you have of them getting better, faster, reducing suffering over time. And so at that time, there wasn't anything more urgent than early intervention. And I learned so much. I learned so much about the extent of the trauma that I didn't fully appreciate. When you're working on a piece of paper, a Google Doc, whatever, it's not the same as when you see it with your own eyes, when you see those folks who went through this horrible massacre, when you realize it's not about the people that were killed. It's not only about the people that survived. It's about the people who bought tickets and didn't go to the party. It's about the people who have siblings who died. It's about the people whose children died. It's about the people who don't want to be only grieving, but want to be in a place of love and a place of life because they want to see their children's friends that are still alive. And so there's just so many ripple effects and so many circles of grief and pain. And that was the first thing that, I didn't comprehend to the full extent. The second thing I think is I did not appreciate how fragmented of a landscape mental health is. As much as we are centralized in healthcare in Israel, and you go to your health medical organization, your Kupat Cholim, and you ask for help and you get help. In mental health there are more than 250 organizations. You have no idea where to go. It's very hard to navigate. There's still a lot of stigma. And, until I was there and I saw how hard it was for everyone to understand just what to do next, um, it was still, theoretical. And I think the last thing I learned, which is probably the most important, is that no one knows what we should be doing right now. Everybody became an expert overnight, just like during COVID. Remember, we're all, now we're all experts on war and mental health and hostage situations. But the truth is, no one knows how, there is no playbook for how do we accelerate trauma healing as a nation, as a collective, as a country. If there was a playbook, Israel would be the best country at taking it and implementing it, because we're amazing at crisis management and implementing, processes. This is something where we need to figure it out. We need to figure it out because we have some learnings from 9/11, some learnings from Hurricane Katrina, some learnings coming from Ukraine right now, Rwanda, a lot of different areas, but there isn't a playbook and we're still figuring out as we go. And so it's about a collective model where we bring everybody around the table and we work together towards a common goal. And that was really the most important lesson.
Is that what your paper has become? Tell us a little bit about the ICAR Collective. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
And what you're building now as a result.
Yeah. So ICAR is the Israel's Collective Action for Resilience. And it's about this idea that because there isn't a playbook, we need to figure out where to put our efforts, where to put our money, and where will we get outsized impact. In VC funds, you would say, where are the pockets of growth that you want to play in? In a large conglomerate or large company, you would say, where should I allocate resources disproportionately to get growth? And here it should be the same thing. We should be very smart about where we spend time and money to be able to accelerate the healing. And to do that, you need to take a macro level view at what's happening. So you need to look across populations, you need to look across the whole pathway. And it's very hard because everybody is so busy with their own efforts, right? Some people are working with the soldiers, some people are working with the veterans, some people are working with the Nova survivors, some people are working with the displaced families, and everybody's doing such important work and working day and night on their specific areas. It's hard to take that macro level population health view. And so that's what ICAR is trying to do, trying to create this collective model where we work with all the different players to map out the supply and the demand on the bottom up way, and then also work with a scientific advisory board comprised of people from the HMOs, the different universities, the government, that can look at this top down and think about where would we invest $100 million if we had it in the next 2 months, right? And then, through this mapping and through these analysis, assess where we need more research, where we need more evidence, and how do we generate it so that we decrease reliance on philanthropy over time. When things make sense, when things save lives and save money because people are healthier, because, high stress levels have impact on your cardiovascular health, on your autoimmune, on your immune system. So once it makes sense, bring these things back into the system, bring these things back into the healthcare system in Israel, which is led by the HMOs. And so we're really focused on this, thinking about this long term, and thinking about how do we generate evidence.
Wow, it's a really big and powerful vision. I'm thinking a little bit about on a smaller scale, the idea that I often talk about, which is collaboration over competition in the business world. And I think that that's so much of what you're talking about with regards to ICAR, is that the collective impact and it opens up doors to possibility. But first, we have to do some education to help people understand what becomes possible when we go to a collective model, when we go to a collaborative model, when we share resources and really support one another instead of continuing to work in our own silos.
That's very right. And I'll tell you that even in the scientific world, this has been a big discussion because when I started the vaccines practice at McKinsey, one of the key things we were talking about is this lack of innovation. And, one of the things we talked about is how do we get to a universal flu vaccine so we don't have to get vaccinated every year? Or how do we get to vaccines in some of the infectious diseases that, are still rampant? And I got pushed back. A lot of people said, if we share too much and if we work too much with each other, then we are going to lose on some great scientific breakthrough from people looking at the problem in a different way. And I heard this and I hear it still, right? But I think there's a difference between shutting down areas but bringing them together still, right? So having a group that brings all those different perspectives to build on one another versus working completely separately. And I think one of the great examples of our time is the COVID-19 vaccines, right? Where I can tell you that in none of the scenarios that I worked on with the World Health Organization did we think that we would get a vaccine in 9 months. Because it's unheard of. And when everybody worked together, put their resources together, pooled their knowledge, and it was government, nonprofit, business, everyone, right, was working towards that common goal, it became possible. In cancer, it was the same thing. In cancer, it used to be super fragmented. There was a lot of, I say, we were peanut butter spreading a lot of money across a lot of different organizations. Once they started to work with one another and we actually centralized their research, and then you had enough money to go far enough, then that's when cancer research really moved forward. And so I think what you just said about collaboration is extremely important for people to understand. It doesn't mean that we want everybody to think the same way, not at all. We think everybody needs to come with different perspectives, but share it so that we all build on one another and accelerate innovation.
Absolutely. And then we also share the results of that, right? We all share in the wins. Of course, when the COVID vaccine came out 9 months later, right? The entire society benefits from that. Same with cancer research and what's coming out to support, unfortunately, the rising numbers of people who are affected by cancer. I want to take our conversation back to the beginning, which was why you left your job and your values. And I want to just ask you how building ICAR now, where you are, has supported your values and also your lifestyle vision for yourself and your family.
Okay. So I would say there is nothing else I would want to be doing right now. I feel like I am exactly where I need to be. It's almost like all my life I've been preparing for now, which is kind of a huge thing to say. Also scary because it's like, wait, so what if I fail? It makes it even more, even bigger in my mind. At the same time, I surrounded myself with an amazing group of people, right? I can't do it by myself. There's no way. And I think every time, we get to learn about the importance of the team, right? We talked about collective impact across organizations, but within ICAR, we're building a group of very diverse people that each brings something different to the table. Now, the second part of your question and how it's matched with my my goals for my family. So in terms of the values, I think everybody's very proud of what I'm doing. But this is a startup and I'm working harder than I've ever worked on. It's also very hard for me to stop working because it's like, wait, if I don't do this, will the people who need the money get it tomorrow? And if they don't get it tomorrow, will we have clinicians trained to help the people who need help? And it's really hard to bring balance into my life since the beginning of the war. but I'm working on it. See, first manicure since the beginning of the war, because I decided that I'm, gonna take that time off and do this. And I went to yoga last week. And so every week I try to come back to also myself and my lifestyle, but at least I'm home. Really, my kids see me every day, morning and night, which I didn't have before. Traveled a bit for ICAR, um, but it's very much aligned with, what I want to be doing. And at the end of the day, I still believe very much in what I've said many times, which is that happy kids have happy parents and happy moms, right? And happy moms mean that we are doing something where we are fully using our potential, where we feel like, we're aligned with what we should be doing. And I think my kids are see this. They see that I'm doing what I need to be doing, and they're proud as well.
It's beautiful. And I appreciate that you honor the struggle here. I think a lot of other women will feel seen in your words because that's really what it is, right? There's no arrival like, oh, yes, I'm going to build a startup or become some other sort of entrepreneur, like maybe even just a solopreneur. It's a constant, it takes constant intention to
Yes.
figure it out.
Yes.
And it sounds like you're working through that. And also, I very much agree with you that we are a model for our children. And when they see us pursuing impact and pursuing excellence and pursuing our own passions and places where we shine, there is there's this spark that is created in them and that is born out of that. And they then see that what they envision for themselves can become possible as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's one last question I want to ask you that I ask all my guests, and that is, what is one tip that you have for other women in business striving to honor their authentic voice?
Good one. I would say learn how to have difficult conversations. I think what holds us back from being authentic is not knowing how to say things in a way that is both respectful to us and our boundaries and the others, right? And there are actual ways to learn and do this. So one thing I teach a lot of people is, how do you give feedback to someone in a way that is respectful? And and usually, you anchor it in an observation instead of saying to someone you're dumb, or you're an ass. You say, hey, observation. Yesterday when I spoke, you interrupted me. It made me feel, right? And there's no arguing about how something makes you feel, right? It made me feel like you didn't value my opinion, or it made me feel like, it was not, you know, you didn't respect, my point of view or whatever it is, but it made me feel. And then you can have that conversation. Then you can open it up. And I think a lot of us hold ourselves back because we don't know how. And I don't think it's a complicated thing to do. There are really easy tips and easy tricks to how to have a difficult conversation, which is a whole other conversation. But we owe it to ourselves to learn how to do it.
That's a great one. There are a bunch of great books that we can recommend and link in the show notes for learning how to have difficult conversations. And I think it comes easily to you and maybe feels intuitive to you. And what I know from experience and in coaching and supporting lots of women is that it is a skill that so many of us need to cultivate.
Oh, it
And
doesn't
so,
all. I'm just gonna put it out there. It's
oh, it
just
sounded like it did. Okay.
because I learned over years that it takes practice. Everything takes practice.
Yes. Yeah.
Once you do it a lot of times, then it becomes easy, right?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to link to a couple resources below to get that conversation started for yourself. And Gila, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story, your expertise, and your most beautiful, authentic voice.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for coming back each week. Our episodes drop on Mondays, and I look forward to engaging with you and hearing what your thoughts are on what we're sharing. So pop over to Instagram or Facebook, take a listen on any podcast platform that you are on, and go ahead and give us a follow. Ring that bell so you never miss a future episode. And of course, keep sharing your voice.